I think we're live. For Wrestling Night in America on, I was going to say PWTorchDailyCast.com, but we're on the PWTorch YouTube page here. This is Pro Wrestling Torch columnist Greg Parks, along with PWTorch.com contributor Brandon LeClair. So we're talking AEW Double or Nothing here, and we're excited to do so. Brandon, glad to have you along. I can actually see you, which is, but
A
yeah,
big change.
uh, it is a big change. And so we're all about the big change here on Wrestling Night in America. So this is going to be our format moving forward. And we're going to do video. We're going to take your comments. We're going to take Frank Pettiani, who was there live at Double or Nothing tonight. We had planned to talk about King and Queen of the Ring as well tonight, but it's almost 1 o'clock Eastern, and even though I don't have school tomorrow, I don't have enough stamina for that. So we'll focus on that maybe next week on Wrestling Night in America. But this is again the Double or Nothing post show. And so, Brandon, let's kick it off with some thoughts. I mean, what did you think about Double or Nothing tonight?
And this was a marathon, and I'm trying not to have my thoughts and my judgments completely clouded by the fact that I had told you off air prior to, and Frank as well, that I kind of ran a marathon today of watching not only Double or Nothing, but also King and Queen of the Ring from yesterday afternoon because I wasn't able to do so yesterday, and SmackDown from Friday. So today has just been wrestling basically since I got up this morning. So I'm a little fatigued. But as far as this show, certainly long. Um, they went about 30-ish minutes over the normal 4-hour mark that we typically see out of these AEW pay-per-views. I thought that there was a good amount of good stuff on there, and also a decent amount that just felt frivolous and superfluous and kind of uh, dived into the territory where I think AEW does some of its lesser work. And I think they leaned into some of those proclivities tonight.
Yeah, this was, if you whittled it down, it was a really good show. And sometimes we say that about AEW, but there was also stuff on here. And I don't want to harp on the length of the show because it is what it is. It's baked in at
Mm.
this point with AEW. Problem is, Tony Khan's excuse has always been, look, we only do 4 of these a year. For 4 times a year, you can sit through a 4 hour show, 5 hours counting pre show. Well, the number of AEW pay per views has now crept up to almost one a month now in 2024. There's really
Mhm.
no excuse to have a show run this long. And okay, it's Double or Nothing, 5 years of the company. Maybe I can buy that. Maybe we'll see what the next pay per view brings, but certainly more in line of what AEW has traditionally done in terms of the runtime, as opposed to a new philosophy with the more pay per views that they have.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I think that it sort of touches upon something that Wade and I had talked about this past week on the Dynamite post show, is that at times there is a certain overindulgence in some of the things that they like to do, and there's a lack of connectivity from match to match, almost as though the agents aren't speaking to each other, and there's no central figurehead who is able to say, hey, maybe save this spot for next time because we're going to do something like that in a later match. So you had a lot of little things being busted out in undercard matches that would then later be used again in the main event matches. There was also some doubling up on some specific tactics. Like if you notice, there were two matches, both the Willow and Mercedes match and the other women's match, the women's world title match with Tony Storm and Serena Deeb, were both heavily based on working over a specific leg injury. And that's something that you typically see one match focus on. And I think that comes from, again, producers or talent not having a central figurehead that they can talk to and run down, like, hey, here are the things that we're going to do in our match. So it's not to double up on some of those storytelling devices. And tonight I thought it really stood out.
Keeping an eye on the live comments here as well, looking for some feedback to see how we're doing since this is the first time we're trying this out. So there's going to be some kinks, there's going to be some issues to iron out, and so far so good. It sounds like Brandon, so that is a good sign. If you want to talk at all about the show, we're certainly happy to display your comments on the screen and discuss them as we go along here on the show. So I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So Brandon, if I'm not directly looking at the camera, my attention is elsewhere. It's the comments, I promise you. Starting with the first match, we had Will Ospreay versus Roderick Strong, and I guess there's an argument that this title is below Will Ospreay. He should be doing other bigger, better things. Is that something that you buy into, or is having a title and having that focus important for someone like Will Ospreay, who's probably going to find himself in the AEW World Title situation come All In?
No, I think it's definitely problematic. I understand why they were interested in putting Osprey in a title match, but at the same time, I think that there is a significant issue with parity among the men's singles titles in AEW. Again, I mentioned this when talking with Wade on the Dynasty post show on or the Dynamite post show with Wade on Wednesday, that there's so much parity with those men's titles that it changes month to month and sometimes week to week as to which one we're supposed to take as the top championship. So unlike something in WWE, for example, where you have the Intercontinental and the US championships on the two brands, they're clearly defined as the number two championship for that show. AEW used to have that with the TNT Championship, and then I think a little later with the international title when Orange Cassidy went on that impressive run with tons of defenses. But now there are multiple. I mean, we're talking the international title, we're talking the Continental Crown, we're talking the TNT Championship, and then you throw into the mix these other titles, the FTW Championship, for example, which is not officially part of AEW, but it is defended. It is talked about regularly. It was defended on this show. You also have the IWGP World Championship featured on these shows pretty regularly now at this point. So there's just so many titles that it's nearly impossible to make any of them feel important. And so, with that in mind, I mean, perhaps Osprey holding this title, it shoots up to being the number two. But how long can it hold that position? I mean, Okada is impressive and is going to have big title defenses. It's very hard for any of these titles to gain any sort of positioning within the company. So, I mean, I wouldn't have pulled this trigger. I think that Osprey is above these championships. I think that you're in a situation where you're looking for Osprey to make the title. And I don't think that's necessarily a great position to be in. I think that you run the risk of dragging him down with the title.
Honestly, I could go both ways on this. I can see both arguments, both for Osprey winning a title, whether it's the international or whatever secondary title you're going to have him win, or having him not win. I think the visual of him celebrating in AEW with a championship, you might want to save that for the AEW World Title. I think there's
Mhm.
something to be said for that, especially if that's going to come at All In August, so soon after him winning this international title and having the image of him celebrating his first AEW championship so soon before he wins the AEW World Title. Awesome match. I think that was a great way to start the
Yeah.
show. But I certainly understand the argument to keep Osprey away from the belts. And honestly, it's hard. There are so many
Mm.
titles. It's
Mhm.
hard if you want to do something meaningful as you would want Will Ospreay to do. It's hard to not have him involved in a title situation.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm taking a look at the chat here, and Kevin was mentioning the idea of maybe Osprey uniting the Continental and International title, and that is something that Wade and I had brought up on the show on Wednesday as a possibility. I am always going to be in favor of them unifying any of these singles men's championships. I think that they would be far better served to have fewer of them. And if they want to run with the Continental title, then so be it. Obviously, it seems like if that would be the case, they'd be getting rid of the International title because they're going to continue with the Continental Classic. But we've all been sort of operating under this assumption for the last several months that the idea is definitely going to be Will Ospreay against the AEW World Champion at All In. That made the most sense, and that would be Ospreay's crowning moment. But I think that there is the other possibility, which is that he's involved in something else, like a title unification with Kazuchika Okada, for example. I
And
don't know
that
if that
would
would
be
be the
the
best use of him, but
yeah, that's another argument, of course, too.
yeah.
And so we've got Hunter is pushing us to talk about the MJF return, and I guess maybe we're burying the lead a little bit, but I like to go chronologically through these. So right after the Osprey versus Strong match, we actually had um, Adam Cole return first. He cut this return promo, and then MJF came back and he made his illustrious return. A little bit of a different look, cut a long promo. This wasn't sort of a tease promo that you may think that you're going to get for a longer promo, that you would see on Dynamite or on Collision. This was a full fledged MJF return promo, mission statement, and all. And this was definitely, he kicks Adam Cole in the groin. Cole tries to go in for a hug, and he announces that he's re-signed with AEW. So Brandon and Kat, I want to ask you both about this because I think it's big enough to get both of your opinions. But what did you think of MJF's return? I mean, spilling a lot of beans there. He re-signs with AEW. Sort of not hand waves away, but in a way acknowledges the poor quality of the storylines that he was involved in before he left. And then basically says, look, this is the MJF that you know and love, and I'm back to wreak havoc. So if you liked lovable, cuddly babyface MJF, he gone.
Yeah, Cat doesn't care, but I do, thankfully. Um, I this started out a little rocky because I thought that Cole's promo was sort of listless and senseless. I mean, it really made very little sense for him to be coming out there in the first place. I mean, his guy just lost. He wasn't coming out there to admonish Roderick for any for losing or anything like that. He was simply just coming out there to say, "I don't want to be here," which is never a great reason or to come out and cut a promo. So they really telegraphed the situation here that like this was explicitly for MJF to return, and it
Mhm.
became evident very quickly. So I didn't like the setup. I thought it felt very telegraphed. But once MJF was in there, things took a real positive turn. New look is cool. I mean, that was very clearly an homage to Triple H's return at Madison Square Garden in 2002.
As
I mean,
as
couldn't
many people have
uh,
pointed out on social media already.
yeah, couldn't have been more obvious. I I I'm a huge Adam Cole fan, and so uh, my default position would not typically be happy that he was sort of cast aside and thrown out of the ring like trash. But in this particular instance, it felt necessary because that angle was so bad and it did so much damage to the both of them that to me, this just felt like a clear admission that they made a mistake, that this didn't work, and that they were moving on. And I hope that it means sooner rather than later they move on from the Undisputed Kingdom as well entirely. Whether that is the case remains to be seen, but it does at least feel like they're turning the page on Adam Cole and MJF, which I think is a huge positive. I I said on Twitter shortly after this promo that I thought that there was a possibility that they were just moving on altogether, that we weren't even going to get an MJF and Adam Cole match, and I think it is certainly possible that Cole isn't quite ready to return yet. But even if he is, I would consider just moving on. I think that they accomplished what they needed to accomplish here. People have a lot of negative connotations with the two of them interacting at this point. I don't know that there's all that much to gain by seeing them wrestle again, especially when we saw it last year. I mean, the results were good then, and obviously, when you come back to it, it's going to be a blood feud this time. But what happened in December was so negative and such a uh, stain on both of their careers that I would think that it's just time to move on entirely. And MJF gave a great mission statement for that.
What did you think about the way Adam Cole was treated? What
I
does
mean,
that tell you? What does that tell you about Adam Cole, if anything, in the AEW hierarchy? MJF, granted, MJF's return is going to trump Adam Cole's return. Adam
sure.
Cole's been on TV. But Adam Cole kicked in the groin, sent packing for MJF, almost like, okay, you can go. Let's have a real star take over.
hmm
What do you feel like that's going to hurt Cole at all going forward?
I if Cole's ready to return, then I think it's a pretty clear message that they see him lower on the totem pole than I think any of us may have thought. But if that's not the case and Cole is still a couple months or a few months away from being ready to get back in the ring, then I think they can turn the page on this pretty quickly when he does come back, and maybe that's the point that they're gonna kick the can down the road a little bit on deciding what to do with Undisputed Kingdom, and when he is ready to return, we'll see whatever the next development is there, or if they're going to move on entirely. But I really think his health is the true indicator as to whether or not we should view this as a demotion or just a means to benefit MJF while they know they're not going to have Cole on TV.
So, just for people tuning in, this is the new format of Wrestling Night in America. You are used to hearing us, probably not used to seeing us. I am Pro Wrestling Torch columnist Greg Parks, joined tonight by PWTorch.com contributor Brandon LeClair, and this is where you can find us moving forward on the PW Torch YouTube page. And we are here breaking 1 o'clock Eastern after a very long double or nothing. So, if you have thoughts in the comments, feel free to leave them. We're getting to those. We're chronologically going through Double or Nothing, and so next up, and I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do, yeah, there we go. The Bang Bang Gang of Jay White and the Guns against the Death Triangle. So that's going to be the next match that we talk about here. This is another one of these that's you talked about how there was some stuff on the show that could have been cut, or if you like 75% of the show, 80% of the show, maybe there's 20, 25% that just didn't click. This was one that kind of felt like it didn't click, although we did get the return of Juice Robinson. I mean, what did you think? There's a lot of returns, a lot of major happenings. We had a turn later on in the show. We had a lot of returns from injury or just in general. Did that newsworthiness of the show help improve its standing in your eyes?
I think a lot of it kind of felt as though it got a little lost in the shuffle because there was just so much going on. There was also a pretty big interference problem on this show. I mean, they did it in I don't have the exact count, but more than half of the night's matches featured outside interference or interference in some way, and that's been an issue with AEW. The booking is very much like Attitude Era adjacent, and I know some people really will enjoy that, but I think for a certain segment of the fans, that's become a bit of a turnoff because they have gotten so used to booking that way and using it as a crutch at times. the second match, I mean, it was good. Like that's the thing with these AEW pay-per-views is by and large you're gonna get good matches up and down the card, and this was no exception. I mean, they did a lot of cool spots. I liked the part where Death Triangle was in a literal triangle with one of the guns in the ring kicking him. But it was a solid match. It didn't have, like, no pun intended, it didn't have a lot of juice behind it because they just made this thing on Wednesday. I mean, they just set this whole thing up. I did appreciate the announcers talking about the fact that they wondered if they wondered if the way that the Bang Bang Gang had been torturing Pac was the reason that he moved to reunite the Death Triangle because there were concerns that they wouldn't wrestle together again. I thought that was a nice little touch. It was a fine match. It's just, almost like too much of a good thing on a show this stacked.
Yeah, I mean, it was decent. But again, when you have a 10 match show and it's just so, you're approaching 5 hours, um, you have to ask yourself, was this super necessary? And Juice Robinson's return, I think, is going to be good because I think um, the Guns and Jay White just need a little jolt of something because you kind of feel like they've lost a little bit of, s- you know, pun intended, I guess, juice. They've lost a little bit of intrigue. They've lost a little bit. I think there's some interest that's gone. I think having that uh, partnership, such as it was with the Acclaimed, hurt both sides really
Mhm.
coming out of this. So I hope that Juice is, he's an unpredictable character within AEW, and I think that unpredictability is going to help Jay White and the Guns, and uh, you know, get back on the map a little bit in terms of really getting fans interested in their act once again.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm not much of a Juice guy. I never have been, and I've been on the record in the past of saying that I think his shtick kind of drags down what Jay White is going for. But at some point, I think I have to reconcile that they're just not interested in Jay White in that way. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, if that's the case, if this is going to be what Jay White's focus and track is in AEW, then I don't think Juice hurts them. I'll be interested to see what they do with them going forward, what kind of angles they're going to put them in, because the trios championships have just been on such an island for such a long time, and they feel like an unnecessary division because what happens with the trios titles is it forces you to take what otherwise would be a competitive tag team from the world tag title division and partner them up with a third guy. And it's not necessarily bad to have some main eventers maybe visit that division every once in a while, but they haven't been doing that. And so instead, you've just had this like lower card fodder. And I was kind of excited about the reunion of Death Triangle because I thought it was um, a cool return to form where you have this actual group battling an actual group rather than the same monotonous Acclaimed feud that we've had for what feels like months on end. They'll probably go back to it. I mean, that would be my guess. And like I said, I liked the match. It just felt like on a show filled with so much stuff, it wasn't necessary. But yeah, I mean, Juice should be fine going forward. We'll see.
It's kind of like a dinner that you go out to, and you go out to a nice restaurant and you have a meal, you save enough room for dessert, as I always do. And when you're done with that, you're like, you know what? I feel good. I'm not full, but I feel good. And that's how you feel after a really good pay-per-view. After an AEW pay-per-view like Double or Nothing, I feel like I'm sitting there with my pants unbuttoned, like got the meat sweats
Yeah.
going, after a dinner out, and that's it was good and you liked it, but it was too
Mhm.
much, and you
Yeah.
just overdid it, and that would be my comparison for Double or Nothing, and for um, some, not a lot, some AEW pay per views.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that's a really good analogy that works very well. It's overindulgent, and
Mhm.
they do it frequently.
All right, let's check out our next match. Here we go with Tony Storm and Serena Deeb for the AEW Women's Title. Um, this was a match that stop me if you've heard this before. Felt a little long, but not just generally. I thought it felt long because Serena really struggles in this build up, and not necessarily through a fault of her own. I thought the idea of the professor character going against a character as broad as Tony Storm's was not a terrible idea. In execution, I don't think it worked. I think you had Tony Storm hamming it up. She has so much charisma, and almost by design, the Serena Deeb professor character lacks that. And so that there was a real struggle there because, and plus they kind of had it backward to begin with they were pushing Serena Deeb as a babyface, and the fans didn't want to cheer her. They wanted to cheer Tony Storm because she's the big flamboyant character that you want to get behind as a wrestling fan. And then they sort of, I thought, changed midstream, and then they came. I don't know if they came back to it during the match, but there was some felt like some babyface spots that Serena Deeb was doing. So I was a little confused by that. But this was a match where the buildup didn't really work, and so I thought this was the opportunity for a kind of a get in and get out match. Don't overstay its welcome because the fans were not as invested in Serena to last as long as this match ended up lasting. So that was more my issue with it. It wasn't anything technical. It wasn't anything in the match, although we had the outside interference once again in this one. But what was your take on the match, the length, the quality, the bill, everything that went into it?
Yeah, this was a little bit damned if you do, damned if you don't, where AEW has gotten a lot of criticism over the years, and rightfully so, for the lack of attention and lack of focus on the women's division, and the poor build, and the poor booking strategy that they've often displayed there. And this match kind of felt like it was victim to some of that. Now, thankfully, they had a much stronger program later on in the show, which we'll get to. But the issue here was, like you said, they hadn't really put enough into this to make it feel like it had earned a 15-16 minute slot on a crowded show. And they also had the conundrum that WWE used to face all the time, and that AEW often faces now, where they're working against a headwind, that the audience has a specific investment in a character, and they are improperly aligned. And I, like you, thought that they had done a course correct on that in the last couple of weeks, and were moving to put Tony Storm in that babyface role and move Serena Deeb, whose character much more naturally lends itself to being a heel, in the heel role. And then immediately tonight, they came out of the opposite tunnels. And I was like, okay, so those, it seems like we were reading too much into the ideas that they were actually committing a double turn. And instead, it was just business as usual. And then they wrestled the match, and it sort of seemed a little bit like Deeb was working heel at times, and then at other times she was more of a babyface. So it was more of that confusion where they just haven't committed one way or the other with Tony Storm or any of her opponents, because Storm is supposed to be a traditional heel but has been cheered since basically the onset of this character. Her opponents are generally liked, but not at any point in contention for getting over and above Tony Storm. They're always going to choose Tony Storm over the women that she's facing. And so no one is ever in an advantageous position. No one ever comes out better having faced Tony Storm, because they're booked in their miscast against her. And so you kind of get this continued trend of Storm battling unnecessary headwind. And the match was good. It was technically sound. I mean, they did the work over on Storm's leg. I thought she sold it well. There was some innovative offense there at the end. I love the pile driver from the top and then going into Storm Zero. Like, there was a lot of stuff that worked really well here, and they teased, of course, the dissension with Luther and Mariah May and throwing in the towel. I thought that was a nice touch. So, plenty of stuff to like here. It's just that it just didn't have a lot of juice, pun intended, I guess.
Yeah, the Mariah May stuff we could move that a little along a little quicker, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
people are ready to see the next chapter in
Mhm.
that, and I know they're bringing the women from Stardom in and interacting with Mariah May and um, doing some teases in that direction. But I do think it is time to move that along at a little more brisk pace.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, next up we have Orange Cassidy versus Trent Beretta, this grudge match coming on the heels of Trent Beretta retiring, apparently. Chuck Taylor after their parking lot brawl, Orange Cassidy being strong-armed into taking this match. And this was another one that was really good. I like that. I think the breakup of the best friends has gone about as well as you can imagine it in terms of Trent Beretta getting some real heel heat out of this. He walks out of the match after losing and tells Renee Paquette he's done. He doesn't want to talk, and he leaves through the crowd. Rocky Romero tried to come and talk to him. He wouldn't have it. So that's an interesting nugget to hold on to for the near future. Orange Cassidy getting the victory here over former best friend Trent Beretta. What did you think about this one, Brandon?
Good match. Didn't overstay its welcome. I thought Trent got some solid heel heat, like you said. Um, he worked over Cassidy pretty heavily in the beginning, and Cassidy sold quite well for him. They did a lot of the come from behind spots. I thought that Cassidy's usage of his normal shtick worked well in this scenario, and they sprinkled it in at very opportune times. As someone who has always preferred the Pixies theme over Jane, I was very excited to see Where Is My Mind return. I don't know if everyone agrees, but that is
I
that
don't
is
I
where
don't
I
know if
stand.
I don't know if I agree. I don't know if I agree.
Yeah,
I think they're both good. Look, I think they're both good, but Jane just hits different for me, I think.
yeah. For some reason, I know I'm probably in the minority there, but I have always been on the side of Where Is My Mind. I don't know why. Something about that song, I think. But I was glad to see that return, and the small shift in personality for Cassidy too. I mean, wearing the black T-shirt, like they mentioned, just showing a little bit of different side to himself. I mean, it's simple, it's basic, but it worked here. The only thing that I didn't like, I think, would be the roll up finish. I mean, and maybe that's just because they're going to come back to this and they're going to do it again. But AEW doesn't always come back to rematches. This isn't like a WWE situation where you see that finish and you're like, oh, that's because they're coming back to this next month. That's
Mhm.
not something AEW always does. So I'll rescind that complaint if it turns out that we're getting another match in this series and they're going to give a more definitive win to Cassidy down the road. But if this is it and they're just going to go in a different direction, I much would have preferred a definitive win for Orange.
Yeah, I wonder how that roll up is going to play into the next phase of this with Trent Beretta. As I said, walking out saying he is done.
Mhm.
Did losing in that way trigger that for Trent Beretta? So that could
Right.
end up playing a part in the next chapter. Well, Brandon, we're having so much fun doing this. I wonder how much fun we'd have if we added another person. So, there's really only
I
one
think
way
I
to
know who
try
it
that
is.
out. There's only one way to try it out, and this is PWTorch.com contributor Frank Pettieni, who was in Vegas at Double or Nothing. We are here to get his expertise from being there live and
He's
everything
got
that
the
went
hat
into
and
that.
everything.
Oh, I know. He looks like a tourist. Look at this. What is it?
All
Frank,
I need is the
thanks for taking the time tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. All I need are the binoculars and the camera and the rubber ducky thing around, right? I don't know.
Well, you're a New York City guy. You know what tourists look like. You've seen plenty of them, I'm sure. There.
Oh, for sure, for sure. How you guys doing?
Doing well, Frank. Somehow still going at 1:20 in the morning on the Eastern Coast. Frank, you were there live, Double or Nothing tonight in Vegas. First of all, what did you think of the show, and what did you think of the crowd?
Overall, I thought it was a really good show. I know we say this every time, and I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but it was long. It was unnecessarily long. I mean, you probably could have sliced a couple of matches. I probably could have done the like maybe the orange match and the trios title match. Maybe you could have shoved that on Collision. Maybe hype it up. Double or Nothing version of Collision. Like,
Does it feel longer when you're there live, or does it feel longer when you're watching at home?
well, that's a good question, Greg. And honestly, it does feel longer. When you're at home. And honestly, if I was home watching the show, I probably would have been a little annoyed. But being there, it does take the steam away. And the fact that the crowd really got into the last, the last three matches, the fact that they were into it really made up for it. And the anarchy in the arena certainly did. You know what I mean? With the final countdown and everything. So, that certainly made up for it. So, better in the building than on TV with the length, that's for sure.
Yeah, understandable. So the show as a whole, Brandon and I kind of, I think, both settled on the fact that it was a good show full of good matches, but there were some things. I mean, I don't know if you'd call them nitpicks, but there were some issues in terms of the interference up and down the show. There were some things that just didn't click. We've seen AEW pay-per-views in the recent past, and you can go back and check the Torch newsletter. I've given 9.5s to AEW pay-per-views the last several outings. So, I'm not someone who's down on their pay-per-view offerings, but we've seen spots kind of repeated. The one thing that I noted on social media, and you can follow me at Greg M. Parks, is in the Copeland Black match, they did the fake out where they had Buddy Matthews and Brody King pretend to join with Adam Copeland before attacking him. Did the same thing in the next match with Chris Statlander pretending to be on Willow Nightingale's side before attacking her in the aisle. So I thought that was a little bit too much in the interference. So maybe a step or two above nitpicks, but I didn't think that they were huge holes in the show. So what did you think of the show itself being there live?
No, I thought the show was overall pretty good. I mean, the shenanigans and, I don't know, I'll let you guys ask me the questions. I don't know what you've covered so far. But the shenanigans is certainly going to be an issue, and they're going to be an issue for some people. Not everybody, a lot of people are going to just love the show. The fans of this product tend to love the pay-per-views in particular. So I don't think it'll be a problem for those people, but people that are looking for stuff like that, people that are looking for the interference or, looking to not have that, we're going to have an issue with it. And when you have it on multiple matches, it's a problem. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think we had that issue at last year's Double or Nothing. I can't be sure. Maybe it was Full Gear, but it was definitely one of the pay-per-views within the past year that had multiple matches with interference. It was kind of frustrating. And it's not what you want to see. The pay-per-views is generally when you want to see payoffs. So that could be an issue. So, yeah.
We haven't talked yet about the main event, Anarchy in the Arena. We're going chronologically through the show. We're only up to, we just talked about Orange Cassidy versus Trent Beretta when you came on. But Anarchy in the Arena, I'm glad you're here because that was one that being there live probably was a little bit of a different experience than watching on TV, more so than any other match on the show. So what was it like being there live for this particular Anarchy in the Arena? A lot of crowd involvement with the music. You had the wild nature of it where by the end of it, I couldn't remember half of the stuff that went on. I'm not sure that's a good thing. You got guys getting run over and coming back, guys getting lit on fire and coming back. And again, if we're to criticize this show, I think those are valid criticisms that people are going to have about what took place on this show. So, from an in-person perspective, what did you think of Anarchy in the arena and the anarchy that actually took place during the match?
I mean, it was just insane. People were eating it up. The final countdown went over huge. I mean, I honestly felt like I was at a rock concert. I mean, 13-year-old me that got that album, I think it was the final countdown. 13-year-old me was so happy, like thinking about that song. But that was great. People went nuts for the spot with Darby getting run over and the fire. It was crazy. And then later on, I'm sure it came across, although I never trust AEW audio. Did you hear a "Please Help Darby" chant when he was strung up from the arena?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I never know what comes across because I know there's been audio issues before, but
I actually couldn't make it out at first, and then commentary thankfully cleared it up. Okay. And then it seemed to become clearer after that. But yeah, it was loud.
Yeah. And it was just, it got to a point, guys. I was just like, I'm not tracking any wrestling. I'm not tracking anything. I'm just watching this and I'm just enjoying it. It was
try covering it in real time.
Brandon, I give you credit. I don't know how you do it, especially with these pay-per-views. I mean, you got to be exhausted right now. Especially you said you watched King of the Ring earlier, you watched SmackDown. I said to when I saw that message, how the hell is he doing these live reports? It's just insane. But and I was I don't know, I think I was texting with Zach, and I said this arena, the people in this arena must have had a pot of coffee or something, or they had Red Bull because they were energized throughout this main event. I mean, we're talking it's 12:30 on the East Coast, 9 o'clock here. I mean, but they were going. So overall, a good experience with that. But with the nitpicks, you brought up the fire spot. I don't know how much you want to get into that or the running over. Because there could certainly be some issues with that production wise.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, I'll throw to you here on this and your thoughts on that. How much did those things take you out of the match? I know it's Anarchy in the arena. It's become kind of a tongue-in-cheek match itself. But did this go over the line for you in terms of what you find acceptable in the confines of the world of professional wrestling as it's presented on television?
It's not my ideal. I mean, it's not what I look for in pro wrestling. I'm sort of resigned to it in a way. It's something that I expect, having seen multiples of these matches now, and expecting that AEW is going to want to, and the wrestlers involved are going to want to up the ante every year and sort of top what they have previously done. So, I mean, from a live perspective, I feel like I would feel very differently about this match if I was there in person. And Frank, maybe you can give that perspective. Because I'm sure you've watched some of these matches at home versus being live in person. And to me, like, the theme music thing would be a lot of fun in that crowd with those people. Watching at home on TV, I'm like, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? Why is production giving into commands to play more music? I mean, they had an out with the Bucks tonight because the Bucks, it's their whole gimmick. But why are they listening to Bryan Danielson? Like, why are they playing Final Countdown just because? Why did they play Wild Thing last year or the year before for like 15 minutes? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I dislike when I have to suspend that much disbelief and check that much logic at the door. I mean, you're already doing it to a certain degree with all of pro wrestling. So when you can circumvent doing things that make your storytelling harder, I always think that, or make your believability, easier. I always think you should do that. So this just throws all of that out the window. I mean, if I view it in a vacuum, it was a fun car crash. It's not for me. It's not what I look for. I mean, would I have okayed the flamethrower spot? No. I mean, is that something I really want to see in pro wrestling? No, not really. And they also missed the time cue on it. So like, if you're gonna do something that huge, you've got to make sure that you're dead on accurate with your time cues. And then like the Darby Allin, maybe not getting run over, like none of that stuff worked for me. There were elements of this match that I thought worked pretty well, and there was some comedy built in there that I enjoyed. But beat by beat, the big parts of this match were too much for what I personally enjoyed. But I get that the audience that they're catering to is going to love it.
Yeah,
I definitely do think this is a match that you have to enjoy live, because there's just so much going on and your senses are tickled throughout the entire match. You're looking over here, you're looking over here, your friend next to you is pointing out something that's happening over there. You're just kind of lost in that group feeling that you're all feeling. You're all experiencing something that is wild and different and special. And with me sitting on my couch with my cat next to me, it's just not the same. It's like that episode of Seinfeld or the deal where he's, talking about how he's drinking the soda, and on the commercial, everybody's on the beach, they're all laughing, they're all playing volleyball, and he's just looking at it like, what am I doing wrong here? Like, that's not happening for me. So I think that's kind of basically the gist of it, Frank. I mean, I know you're old school. I know that kind of match doesn't really normally appeal to you, but probably when you're in the audience, it's a little bit different animal.
Listen, you're in the audience, got a couple of beers in your system, you're going to enjoy it. They're playing they're playing my kind of music. It's going to hit the right bone. Okay.
Yeah.
It's going to play the right string with me. But I'll tell you this, if they didn't do the fire spot and they didn't do the car crash scene, it would have been just fine. I mean, you could have had everybody just beating the crap out of each other with trash cans, tables, chairs, whatever whatever weapon you want to use, and it would have been just fine. I did get a laugh though. There was a guy next to me, for what it's worth, after the car crash scene. He leans over to me. He goes, he did it for The Rock. And it took me a second. And then I thought about the Rikishi story from years ago. So I did get a little chuckle out of that. But
what the callback on that? Wow.
Yeah. And then I did okay. Like just the way Rikishi said it, it's just but yeah, it's all, like I said, look, the crowd ate it up for sure, but the sensible one in me just says it's not necessary. I mean, hopefully they took all the precautions. I mean, I would think they would. I mean, like I immediately thought about like Kane and the Undertaker doing the Inferno matches and MVP back in the day and everything, and I know they took, they put the suits on them or whatever, So I mean, hopefully that was all done. But I think you said it, Brandon, when you're doing that kind of spot, everything has to be set up perfectly. You can't screw around with something like that, So, yeah.
I mean, Darby was just kind of waiting there.
Yeah.
Like, he was just waiting for his cue. Like, I mean,
yeah, it looks
you got to time that stuff. Yeah.
It looks stupid. I'm just sitting there like, what is he doing? And it's just, yeah. So
they had another issue with that during the barbed wire steel cage too, waiting for Gangrel to come out. I mean, Malachi Black was just standing there like an idiot.
Oh my God. It was driving me. I'm like, what's going on? They're just standing there. Like, what are you doing? Like, yeah, it was a little bit of a delay.
Look, Gangrel is worth the wait. I'm sorry.
Yes.
That's the thing here.
If I may, Greg, before you, it's
Go ahead.
amazing to me. It's amazing to me. Sometimes, and I tweeted this out, or I posted this out. Is it a tweet anymore? You never know how wrestlers resonate with people. Gangrel and the Brood is a mid-card act from back in the day, on it like the first, within the first hour of Raw or something like that. And 25 years later, he's so revered. And I know he did a lot more than just, be Gangrel. I know he, helped a lot of guys, trained a lot of guys, this and that. So I know what David Heath, I think that's his real name. I know what he means to a lot of people. But it's just amazing to see how happy people were to see him. And he was just this mid-card guy back in the day in the Brood, So just amazing to see that all the time.
Nostalgia is a funny thing.
For the attitude. Yeah, it's reverence for the Attitude Era. And that's the thing, as I said at the beginning of this show, that the level of interference, the stuff that they were doing tonight, a lot of it was just Attitude Era adjacent. Like they were pulling a lot of those tricks out of the bag.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's funny though, the interference, the one match that didn't have it, and there's the one that probably should have had it, was the Mercedes Moné match. Have you guys haven't talked about that yet, have you?
Nope.
All right, I'll wait. I'll wait till you talk about it.
Yeah. Well, I want to get your thoughts on just the reaction again from being there live. I kind of want to focus the discussion on that for now, anyway. Who were maybe the three top babyface reactions, the three top heel reactions from being there live?
MJF on the babyface side, Will Ospreay. Just going over the card myself. I would say MJF, Will, and Swerve. And believe it or not, Billy Gunn is like an honorable mention. Is that not insane? I mean, literally,
Attitude Era.
There you go. MJF. Well, I think MJF because of the return. I think that helped a lot. But yeah, MJF, Ospreay, Swerve, Billy Gunn, honorable mention. Just crazy.
Okay. So for heel heat, who did you have?
For heel, for heel heat, definitely our father, our loving father, Christian. Mercedes, but it was really weird because when she came out at first, she wasn't getting booed, and then when she was introduced, she was booed. It was just like we went from one reaction to the other. I was just like, okay, like this doesn't add up. And let me see. I took a bunch of notes. The third, Copeland, no. Oh, Trent. Trent actually got a lot of heat. And Greg, you posted that out too, that he was getting, and I'm glad you did, because he was getting a lot more heat than I expected. So yeah, those would be the three.
Interesting. Brandon, any live focused questions for Frank? Otherwise, I mean, Frank, I don't know how much time you have with us, but we could just go right down the rest of the card and you can kind of give us your live perspective of some of the matches as well.
Yeah, I'm going Broadway, man. I'm on an overnight, so I'm going Broadway.
All right, Brandon, anything you want to hit him with before we move on to the FTW, the FTW title match? Anything specific of being there live?
No. See if it comes up during the rest.
All right. So let me go back because I'm still working with the interface here. So I think we have here it is. Get ready. There it is.
Oh,
the FTW title match. See, I got all these tricks to play with now, so be careful. Chris Jericho versus Shibata versus Hook, FTW title match here. Jericho getting the victory. Brian Keith helps Jericho, the bounty hunter himself, perhaps being a new part of the learning tree. And so I kind of half jokingly said two of the worst gimmicks in AEW were in the same match, and I was hoping someone would ask me which two I was talking about because I didn't really allude to which ones I was talking about. But this match, Frank, again, being there live, was there a lot of interest? What was the reaction to Chris Jericho? A lot of people saying Jericho getting booed because people don't want to see him. Some people taking it as Chris Jericho being booed because he's being an effective heel. What was your impression of the crowd reaction to Jericho?
So I had to pick a match where I had to get up and call home and say goodnight to the kids. So this was the match I picked. All right. I did hear the reaction for Jericho. I think to answer your question, it's somewhere in the middle. I'm not sure he's really being an effective heel. It's probably resonating with a small portion of the audience, but I think a larger portion of the audience is just done. Okay. And I think I'm at a point with Chris where it's not that I hate him or anything like that, but I think it's time for him to take a break. It would freshen him up a little bit. And, it would make a return feel a little special if that happens. So I don't think I'm alone because there were a lot of people getting up for the restroom and a lot of people getting food during this match. So I definitely picked the right match. I just personally, listen, all these titles, FTW title, Continental title, international, it gets to a point. And like I said, this was the one I picked. So, but they did pop for the table spot. And I think the pancakes that I make were more robust than the reaction that Brian Keith got. That was flat. It was just an absolute nothing burger. So yeah.
They only brought him back to TV like 2 weeks ago. They barely had time to reintroduce him. So I'm not surprised that went over as poorly as it did. Brandon, your thoughts on the FTW title and the "Hi Guys" gimmick of Chris Jericho that he's doing right now?
Yeah, this was the low point of the night for me, and that's not even to say it was terrible or anything. The match was fine. I didn't think that the setup for this made a whole lot of sense. I talked about that with Wade on Wednesday. I dislike the double pinfall cop out finish, and Jericho just like happily announcing that it was going to be a three-way, only to have Shivani then like try to course correct and say that Tony let him know that it was going to be a three-way, was just a mess. And so like I kind of had a sour taste in my mouth coming into this thing. Yeah. And it was more or less what I expected. Hook did some impressive stuff. Shibata looked good. I liked the double team work that they did on Jericho. The dice was like, the die spots were dumb, but they weren't hurting anybody. Figuratively, of course. I'm sure landing on them doesn't exactly feel good. This was just there. One of those things that I think the show could have done without. The reveal of Brian Keith, yeah, just a total nothing burger. There has been no attempt to put anything behind that guy to date, and the reaction kind of told the story there. If the plan is to put him with the learning tree, then we'll see what they can get out of it. But I'm also just not sure, based on the way that commentary reacted to the situation, that they weren't trying to sell the idea that he was just really mad at Hook and Shibata for beating him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was strange all around, just the way everything unfolded there at the end, and the involvement of Brian Keith. We'll have to see how that plays out on TV moving forward. Next up, Jon Moxley versus Konosuke Takeshita. This was an IWGP World Heavyweight Championship eliminator match. This was one that Jon Moxley won. And that leads me to actually my next point, which is how much Don Callis is too much. Because I think they tested that theory tonight. Yeah. Frank, what did you think about, and maybe it wasn't as noticeable being there live, but there was a lot of Don Callis on the show. And then he had a backstage promo even later on, plugging something coming up for Dynamite on Wednesday.
Yeah, this is probably a PG show, so you probably don't want me saying what they were chanting to Mr. Callis a little throughout the match. So I'll.
It was audible.
Okay. All right. Well, I need not say. Yeah, it was a bit much, but the interesting thing was that the crowd was behind Takeshita. Okay, it's not that they were booing Moxley or anything like that. That
was what I was going to ask you. Was it instead of Moxley, or were they just behind both guys?
They're behind both guys. This was, and I think I posted it about this match. This is an example of having your cake and eat it too. It really was, because I mean, they were cheering Moxley as they always do. Okay. And I'll bring up something about that in a second, but they were cheering Takeshita too. And, I think watching that match tonight, if that's not a signal to TK that you've got to do something with Takeshita, because he's a talent. Okay. And that was a really good match. It was one of the matches that I really enjoyed on the show. Then I don't know what is,
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing about Moxley, like, the idea that they tried to turn the Blackpool Combat Club heel how many times? And I know, Brandon, you talked about that. You lamented about that many a times. And he just keeps getting cheered. It's just like, why did they ever try to make this guy a heel? It just doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. But yeah, no, good match. And but definitely an interesting development to see the support for Takeshita in a match like this.
Brandon, we have a couple members now of the Don Callis family in Konosuke Takeshita and Will Ospreay, who seem to be more babyface than heel. And I'm wondering, this isn't a situation like the Blackpool Combat Club where sometimes they're baby faces and sometimes they're heels. Takeshita kind of heals it up a lot more than Ospreay does, but he also gets cheered quite a bit. So where does this end? Like, does AEW, do they just have eventually Takeshita and Ospreay turn on Don Callis? Does Callis turn on them? Do they stick with Callis as baby faces, even though he's a heel? I think the fear is you're going to miss out on a big opportunity with one or both of these guys if you're so hell-bent on keeping them as part of the Don Callis family, even as fans want them to break out as singles babyface stars.
I think that the priority right now absolutely has to be on Ospreay and getting him out from under the auspices of Don Callis. And that's not to say that I don't think that big things aren't in store for Konosuke Takeshita, because he's incredible, and I really, really liked this match. Thought it was one of the stronger ones on the card. Great psychology, great ring work, and Takeshita's been awesome. But Ospreay's the guy, and I've said on a few of these shows that AEW should be going all in, no pun intended, on the Will Ospreay business. And so, first order of business to me is get Ospreay away from Don Callis, because it doesn't make any sense. Because Will Ospreay is a babyface by definition and by crowd reaction. At least with Konosuke Takeshita, he is a heel, even if he's getting the opposite reaction from the crowd. And that's an issue that we've talked about, on this show and other shows at length, where AEW has that problem up and down the card with a lot of acts. But to me right now, the most important thing is getting Ospreay out from underneath the Don Callis family. It doesn't make sense that he's still riding with them, given that he's had several months now to see how they operate within the context of AEW, and he clearly is not not willing to participate in the way that they that they operate. So get him out of there first, and then we can worry about Takeshita after that. I think that Takeshita has and is still benefiting from the Don Callis partnership, largely because he's not and hasn't been cutting a lot of promos. I think Callis as his mouthpiece works and helps to, give Takeshita that menacing presence on the mic. But I think eventually the time is going to come where you have to separate them. I just think that there's more to do there before they go with it. And they're so heavy in terms of top baby faces right now, or characters that can or will be baby faces, that I think they've got some time on the Takeshita side. Whereas they don't with Ospreay. Like, get him away from Callis now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Ospreay. I think I even tweeted it out that I'm all in on Ospreay, like no reservations, push him to the moon. And so I totally get that. The semi-main event to the triple main event, I guess you could say, Adam Copeland versus Malachi Black. This was a barbed wire cage match. for the TNT Championship. This is where we had the Gangrel interference that will go down as one of the greatest moments in AEW pay-per-view history. So I don't think I'm using any exaggeration when I say that. Frank, this is another one of those matches that was probably really entertaining live. I think the brutality lived up to what sort of Copeland and Malachi Black had set forth in their promos leading up to the show. You had that, you had the moment where they ended up outside the cage, which to a lot of fans is kind of eye rolling at this point that you have a steel cage that everybody somehow leaves. And they did the fake out with Brody King and Buddy Matthews pretending to join with Adam Copeland before going back to Malachi Black. So what was the consensus from the fans inside the arena about Malachi Black versus Adam Copeland?
Yeah, I think they enjoyed it. They really did. They popped for the power bomb onto the table for sure. That got a big reaction. People were like gasping when Copeland was going to the top, a la his hero Mick Foley there, about to jump on Malachi. That got a huge reaction. Looked like he missed it a little bit. I've never seen Copeland do a spot like that, so I don't know if he was a little uncomfortable or just missed the timing, because I know like he came down, but it looks like he hit his head on the table or something like that. I don't know. Maybe you guys saw it a little better on TV, but he did hit it. And it got. It
looked like the intent was to come down with the elbow on him on the table, but he landed on his feet, so it was kind of awkward because you're used to seeing when they do that spot, you're used to seeing them go elbow and then like kind of the whole body through the table instead of landing on your feet the way. So there was certainly some awkwardness to it.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead.
He pulled up a little bit on it, and commentary did a good job covering for him if that wasn't the intent. They basically said that it was a pinpoint elbow in the space between the shards of the strand of barbed wire, so that he didn't land his body in the barbed wire, so that Malachi took all the damage and he didn't, basically.
Gotcha.
Taz is good. Taz is really good at covering for that stuff, which he actually wasn't. He wasn't actually on the call there, so I forgot. Nigel was still with him at the time, but Taz is typically really good at covering for botched moves.
Yeah, that was weird too with the commentary, by the way. Like at one point I noticed that, wait a minute, Taz is gone. Now Nigel's there. And then they switched back later on. I don't know if there was a flow to that, but whatever happened there, the crowd was still into it. It's interesting with Brody King, and that's another situation that they're going to have to address. He's getting a positive reaction. He's getting the, whatever the hell they do with him. And that's something else. I mean, you don't want your heel faction getting that kind of reaction. And that's a problem up and down this promotion, is a lot of heels are getting positive reactions, and I don't know. Do you got to flip the script on how you book this place? I mean, just throw out the whole heel babyface thing and just let people fight. I don't know. Conversation for another day. But something to think about. I don't think people bought that they were aligning with Copeland. Like it got a reaction, but it didn't get a strong reaction because people know this place. Everything is a Swerve, and I'm not talking about Swerve Strickland. Everything is, So when they attacked Copeland, they kind of were like, okay, yeah, this is what we expected. So nobody really bought that. And the Gangrel spot was amazing. People were expecting it. People were calling for it. Some people in my section were calling for Christian, but I'm like, that's not going to happen. So
I was thinking, Christian's backstage warming up for his match and gets a shiver down his spine when all this is going on and can't really understand why. That was kind of how I interpreted it likely taking place.
I thought for 1 second, before you turn to Brandon, I thought for once, was the Hardys in the Brood too? I know I'm putting you guys on the spot. Were they in the Brood as well?
They replaced Edge and Christian.
Yeah.
They replaced. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, are we gonna get Matt out here to say? You know what I mean? Like, it's some kind of weird twist. But Yeah, no, they popped for that, and they really enjoyed it. I don't think people cared about the delay, though. I know you guys were talking about the delay in the Gangrel spot. Nobody in the building really cared about that, but if I was home watching, I'd be like, all right, what's going on? So, but they finally got to it. So there.
It was noticeable enough that even when I am covering and not having my eyes glued to the screen, I was like, what's happening? What the hell are they doing? Because they zoomed in on Malachi so that they could get the Brody King spot off camera so that you wouldn't see Gangrel punching up through the ring. But Malachi started looking around and selling Gangrel's music before it hit because he was just standing there waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
Brandon, we had the question earlier on the screen from Tim saying, is Malachi done? I know for a long time there's been rumors of Malachi Black going back to WWE. There's been rumors of him being reticent about doing jobs in AEW. And the fact that he passed out and did not tap out or get pinned is not going to help that cause. Do you see him? I think the fact that he passed out and didn't tap out probably if he was on his way to WWE or if he was leaving, he probably would have been forced to do one of those things on his way out. But is sooner rather than later. Let's not put any sort of timestamp on it, but is he a guy you see back in WWE? I don't know, before the end of 2024, or just generally speaking?
I think it really is just dependent on when his deal is up. I mean, Tony has been really, really reluctant to let guys out of their contracts for the most part. And so even if it is something that he wants, I know that there was some talk about the idea that his deal might have been extended quite significantly because of the time that he missed due to injury. So if that's the case, then it still could be a while before he's a free agent. But I mean, absolutely. Like I don't think there's any question that as soon as he has the ability to leave AEW, he will be gone. And given the fact that he was booked quite well under Paul Levesque in NXT, I can certainly see why he would want to go back there. Does it mean his WWE stint will be any different? Not at all. Look at Andrade. I mean, he could, don't do that to me. I don't that they need to go away.
He fits like a glove, though. Not for nothing. If they boot Damian Priest out of the faction and he can get there in time, he fits like a glove.
I don't think they can. I don't think that stable can stay afloat long enough to get Malachi out of his contract. I do want to say though about that match, I had a chuckle when Copeland came out because of course he had to do the big dark brood entrance with Slayer and spend all the money. And I talked about this with Wade on Wednesday, and Wade brought up a great point that I'm gonna more or less repeat here in that he wishes, and I very much wish, that Copeland could find middle ground, because he is either seems like he's just going through the motions and doing the same thing that he has always done for year after year after year, and he is like the happy-go-lucky I'm team AEW rah-rah guy, or he is this incredibly dark, sinister version of himself that feels very community theater-esque. There's no in-between with him. And I desperately want to see an in-between, because I think that is an Adam Copeland that I could really, really enjoy. But at the end of the day, man, I just think people want to see him come out to Metalingus and do his poses and hit his pyro and then have good matches. Like, I get it. Like this, I'm sure the live crowd loved the Slayer entrance and stuff. But Frank, I assume that the crowd would have loved to see him come out to Metalingus just as much.
Yeah, that would have been fine. As a matter of fact, he came out to that at Mania last year, didn't he, with Finn in the steel cage match?
Yeah, yeah. I think that they cut to Metalingus like
Oh, they cut
halfway
to
through when he was
Metalingus.
down the
Okay,
ramp.
that's
Yeah,
right. You're right. You're right.
yeah.
And that's kind of what I was expecting. That's kind of what I was expecting, especially
Me
at a big
too.
pay-per-view. Especially at a big
Hmm.
pay-per-view. I mean, the whole, you think you know me.
Hmm.
Like that's something I would have, because how often am I going to see Copeland live? I mean,
Right, right.
I'll be at Forbidden Door maybe next month. So, we'll see if that happens there. I don't know. It's interesting. I have to think about what you're saying right now. I just don't know if middle ground Copeland does much for me. I don't know. I'm not saying he doesn't, but it's something I got to think about because I feel like with him, you either have to go hard in one direction. Either you have to go into the dark, direction, or you have to go into the, more extreme direction. I don't know if down the middle is really something that suits him. Maybe we have to see it, to see if it works. I don't know, but I don't know. Like
I don't even know if necessarily if down the middle is if I'm using the right term for it. I think I want to see Adam Copeland be himself and have good competitive matches and be invested in strong pro wrestling angles rather than just be the rah-rah guy, or this version of
Yeah.
what we're seeing.
See, the problem is we never got to see that. We did see it in the beginning when he started out, right? And that never really went anywhere until he became the ultimate opportunist. And then if you think about it, 6 or 7 months, he's on the shelf, right? He's on the shelf for about a year. So you got to wait. He comes back, and they have to kind of, you think about it, they were working around the injury how many times, back in those days, back in the late 2000s, up until he retired the first time. So I don't know if we ever got a chance to see, just Edge or Adam Copeland have that chance to, just be a wrestler, like you said, because of the circumstances. They did in the beginning, and it was kind of, like I think of the 2001 run when he was coming out to Rob Zombie's theme. They were doing that. And that was fine. He was the IC champ. He was working with Christian back and forth or whatever. But I don't think it really resonated with anybody. I don't think it really got to that next level. I mean, feuding with Booker T over shampoo probably didn't help, but hey, that's another story. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting thing that you bring up, something that I'm gonna think about now.
Well, let's move on to the first of our three main events as advertised tonight. It was Willow Nightingale defending her TBS championship against Mercedes Moné, returning to action for the first time in some time. And as expected, Mercedes Moné getting the victory over Willow, becoming the new TBS champion. And then after the match, we had Chris Statlander turning on Willow Nightingale. So a lot of eyes on Mercedes Moné here. A lot of people disappointed, perhaps, with the character work that she's done in AEW so far, the interviews that she's done, putting a lot of weight into this first match. And I think she passed with flying colors. She's already proven to be a great big match wrestler throughout her career. So, not a surprise that she comes through in the clutch here. Sort of surprised at the very beginning when they had Willow take so much of the match in the first few minutes, but then they ended up working Mercedes into it offensively. And I thought they did a really nice job with the story of the match and everything. And, I think for the Mercedes Moné doubters that were out there since she came to AEW, I think this silenced them for at least one night. Brandon, what did you think of this match? And Mercedes Moné, again, I think for a lot of people, I'm not sure how you felt about this, but for a lot of people, there's a lot of pressure here for Moné to live up to the billing and live up to the hefty price tag she was coming into AEW with. And again, I think she passed that test tonight.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of justified criticism in the way that she was handled coming into this match, and the way that she carried herself. I mean, and let's not put all the impetus on the promotion. I mean, she certainly had not been living up to the billing as being a real difference maker. And I think that's something that a lot of people forecasted in a lot of ways, just saying that, as a babyface, she's never been a particularly strong promo, and she's probably likely to struggle in a situation where she's not being given much guidance. And I think we saw that play out week after week. And I think everyone, myself included, was just excited to see her finally step through the ropes, because that is where she, that's where she draws money. No pun intended. And so there definitely was a lot of pressure on her to deliver tonight. I thought Willow was a really strong first opponent. I've been a huge advocate for Willow Nightingale and what she has done for the women's division in AEW, and I thought they delivered. The bar is incredibly low, because I think that the women's division has been really a sore spot for AEW since the beginning. But I would put this right up there with any match that they've had in that division. I mean, I thought it was really, really good, and comparable to what you would expect out of a main event WWE women's match. And all along, that is what I have been hoping to see out of the AEW women's division, is them being able to have, an 18 to 20, 25-minute match where it feels like they could go on last on a pay-per-view. And this had that. I mean, it felt like a co-main event with the other two main events. Crowd was invested right from the start. It sounded great on TV. And Frank, you're nodding in agreement, so I assumed it came off really well live too. Yeah. I just thought it worked really well. Greg, I noticed the same thing that you did, where, they gave Willow a lot in the early going, and I was a little concerned, given that Mercedes had been leaning so heavily heel, how they were going to work in the fact that Willow had a significant size advantage, and usually that plays into, Mercedes being as undersized as she is. Usually that's good for a babyface in that position. But they worked through it without issue. I thought this was really good. Only complaint has nothing to do with the match itself, but the telegraphed, overbooked swerve of a swerve turn from Chris Statlander at the end, which they had just done it in the previous match. It was telegraphed swerve of a swerve. They do swerves for the sake of swerves, and then swerves on top of swerves. So that was a big thumbs down.
And then swerve in the next match.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the same thing.
The actual swerve, yeah. So double thumbs down on those two happenings, but big thumbs up on that match itself.
Frank, I thought when I gave you that question about the babyface reactions, the top three, that you might have thrown Willow Nightingale in there. So I'm curious as to get your thoughts not only on the quality of the match from being there live, the babyface reaction, comparing it to some of the other top baby faces on the show that Willow Nightingale got. And then the reaction to Mercedes Moné. Was it more heel? Was it more babyface? I know at times there were dueling chants for Mercedes and for Willow Nightingale. So certainly the entirety of the crowd didn't seem to be against Mercedes Moné. But what was the maybe percentages like from your vantage point of the reaction to Mercedes heel versus babyface?
Yeah, I mean, this went from, I don't want to say cheers, because the CEO thing is what throws everything off. I mean, you give wrestling fans a chant, they're going to go. So they're naturally going to say CEO. But when she was introduced, she got clear boos. All right. It was clear as a bell. So the crowd was definitely behind Willow at that point. Was the reaction for Willow strong? I mean, it was fine. I wouldn't say it was huge, but it was definitely positive, and then we went to the dueling chants, as you mentioned. We went to Let's Go Willow CEO, so we had that going on.
It sounded like one of those chants where the same people were chanting for both. I don't know if you can tell in the arena, but
it's hard to tell.
a lot of times when you hear the dueling chants, it's like the kids and women chanting for one wrestler and the vocal males chanting for the other. This
Oh, I
time it
see.
felt
Yeah.
like it was the same crowd chanting for both women, just to kind of do a dueling chant, just to say they did it.
Yeah, no, I think it was just the people that, because that's just something that comes together, like the Let's Go Cena sucks. That's something that just kind of, although that's probably more the males chanting Cena sucks and the women and children chanting Let's Go Cena. But anyway, it's a conversation for another day. When she won the title, it wasn't that's why I told you before, it was the strangest line of or strangest timeline of events. That's how I should put it. From getting cheers to getting boos to getting a dueling chant, then to getting quote unquote cheers at the end. It was just like, I honestly, I can't make heads or tails about how this AEW crowd feels about its wrestlers in general. I really can't. Especially people like Mercedes. It just, you go from one thing to another. Like the same thing with Takeshita. Takeshita getting the reaction as I mentioned earlier. So, but the introduction was very telling. The introduction, and they should just look. I know you're asking me about the in-person perspective, and I'm going a little further here, but just make her a heel. Just make her a heel and call it a day. She gets the reaction. You got plenty of baby faces you could stick against her. It'll work. They cheered Tony Storm for crying out loud, so it'll work there. Just put her where she belongs and run with it. And if you can give her a mouthpiece at some point, give her a mouthpiece. Because as you guys both talked about, promos were just never her thing. I mean, it never was. I mean, WWE covered for it pretty well. They ain't covering for it here. They give everybody more agency here, and Mercedes is probably one you don't want to give much agency to. So that's something I would think about if I was AEW.
Stokely and Mercedes Moné would be great.
100%. That's a perfect fit. That's a perfect fit. Oh, and I'm glad you brought up Stokely. I don't think people bought what happened after the match when Stokely got shoved. I think they were just waiting. They were waiting for Stat to turn. Everybody knew what was happening. And as I mentioned earlier, you had all this interference. You had all this nonsense going on throughout the show. If you wanted a match with interference, this would have been the match. Have Stat do something during the match and cost Willow the title. It would have protected Willow. You could revisit the match. I mean, she just won the title a month ago, and she loses clean. If anything, this would have been the match to do that, not do it afterwards. So, yeah.
Goes back to the same stuff they did back with Adam Cole and MJF, where if Adam Cole is going to turn on MJF, why is he helping him win the title? Like what are we doing here?
And to be fair, we'll have to wait to hear the explanation from Chris Statlander. It could have something to do with Willow losing this match. I mean, that could be the trigger that sent Chris Statlander over the edge. Yeah. So, with that could have played a part too. So, just we'll give it a week and see what the explanation is, and then we'll come down harder on it next week if we need to, I guess. That'll be how we do it. The second main event of the three, Swerve Strickland defending his AEW championship against Christian Cage, the rare major title match going on second to last rather than in the last spot, although really hard to do Anarchy in the arena anywhere but in the main event. This, for me, guys, kind of had the feel of Cody Rhodes versus AJ Styles, where you're going to get a really good match, but the champion is going against someone who's maybe a level below what you would expect out of a pay-per-view main event challenger. When you've got a roster full of guys, as AEW does, the level of Will Ospreay, the level of Jon Moxley, the level of Adam Page, even though he hasn't been around much lately, and you end up going with Christian, who, don't get me wrong, is a fantastic character, has done a lot of great character work, but certainly feels like he's reached his ceiling with this character at this point. He suffered now a couple big losses, the TNT Championship first, and then this very high-profile loss in an AEW title match. So you do wonder what is next for him. But it did feel similar to Styles versus Cody Rhodes in that way, where you're not really expecting the champion to win. And most people would look at it as maybe a challenger a level below what you would expect out of a pay-per-view challenger for a major title. Frank, what was the reaction to Swerve? I know he's still in that range where he's, some crowds are a little more tepid toward him than others. I think he's getting good reactions everywhere, but he's getting strong reactions in some places, not so strong reactions in other places. This seemed like this would be the crowd that would give him a strong reaction. What was the reaction to Swerve, and then your thoughts on the match itself?
The reaction was strong for Swerve. I'm trying to see if I can pull up the video. Yeah, it was standing room. It was standing room when he was coming. I just had to look at my pictures for a second. It was standing room when he came out. Obviously everybody's going to pop for whose house, Swerve's house, so that's going to work. But this crowd was definitely into him. I feel bad because it's a situation tonight that, the Anarchy in the arena is what they're leaning on the most. And, him being the champion just feels secondary. I mean, I think it even felt that way at was he the main event at Dynasty? Now that I think about it, I know I'm putting you guys on the spot again. Was he the main event of that show? He was the main event. Okay. But it just hasn't, I don't know. It just hasn't felt like Swerve being the champion has been their focus. It's been this elite story and Tony Khan. So, hopefully a strong crowd reaction like tonight, and hopefully some future reactions will help in that regard. Christian, I mean, you asked me earlier about the top heels, the top reaction for the heels. He definitely got a strong reaction. It's one of those, it's funny. And I was thinking about this, Greg, as you were talking, like, this is a match that would have worked on like Saturday night's main event back in the day, because that's when they used to feed challengers to Hogan. They used to feed like Sika and Hercules Hernandez. Like, you knew those guys weren't going to beat Hogan, but they were just fed to him, but
I think Christian's a level above Hercules Hernandez.
Right. But the point is, Christian isn't beating Swerve for the title. So like,
sure,
these no-brainers, you would do on television. I mean, now it's a whole different ballgame. You got Dynamite every week, Collision. So, it's hard to really, hard to space it out, I guess is the best way to put it. But they were still into the match, and things definitely heated up once the ejections started taking place. I started getting annoyed when Nana got thrown out. I says it took the ref 10 years to throw the Undisputed Kingdom out, and they were getting involved in the match, but God forbid. And then he threw everybody out. He threw Nick and everybody else out. So at least he right. I just hate that spot. And AEW does this way too much. And I think the crowd was even getting annoyed with it too, where, he's tied up with Christian for no good reason. Okay. No good freaking reason, and they're banging on Swerve. It's just like, come on. It just looks so low rent. It just looks so dumb. But, at least they straightened it out. There was a big reaction. There was a big, or Nick Wayne got some heat, for coming back out. And then the pipe spot, I had a cackle with Swerve not as coming out with the pipe. I'm just like, I'm here for it, man. I love it. And he's just running after Nick, and the crowd, they ate it up too. So, for a match that, Greg, to your point, for a match that was a no-brainer, at least they dressed it up and gave you a little bit of excitement. And, towards the end, it had some spots where it looked like Christian could win. So they did a nice job with a match with an obvious outcome.
Brandon, same kind of questions to you there. The match itself, what do you make of Swerve? I guess you could argue a good, solid win for Swerve Strickland here to continue piling on wins in his title reign, to continue to establish him as a main eventer. first time being this level of a champion, this level of a main eventer in a company this size. So, he's not a guy who was a main eventer or a major champion in WWE. So if you're AEW, you want guys like that to stack wins on top of wins, even if it's against somebody like Christian Cage, just to continue to establish their bona fides to the fans, to tell people, hey, this is a guy who deserves to be at this level.
Yeah, to piggyback off what Frank was saying, regarding the match itself, I really disliked the level of egregious interference here. I think that when you're AEW and you are so often fighting the tide of getting people to cheer your heels, and you have one of the promotion's only true heels in Christian Cage, lean into that. And rather than do that, they made the damn referee the heel. They should never. This isn't professional sports. So in pro wrestling, you have ultimate control as to how you want to portray your officials, and your officials should be as invisible as possible. They should be doing their job, calling the match down the middle, unless there is a very specific situation that calls for something otherwise. Sports has, in sports, people will boo officials when they perceive that something is unjust or unfair, a bad call against their team. In wrestling, everyone is playing along, something is predetermined. And so you're in full control as to how your referee is portrayed. And I just don't think that there are very many scenarios where in an AEW world title match, you want to be drawing so much attention to the official. And here they did that, whether consciously or unconsciously, by having them repeatedly be completely blind to what was going on. I mean, the level of interference and the distractions that Cage was doing were so blatantly obvious to everyone that they were not booing Cage anymore. They were booing the official, and by extension, the promotion. So I had a big problem.
Brandon, but by this point in the show, we had seen interference up and down the card.
Exactly.
If you took this in a vacuum, maybe, the referee stuff aside, maybe you'd be a little more willing to forgive the level of interference in this match. But by this point in the show, we've seen it up and down the card,
with varying degrees of involvement or willingness to curb the interference by referees. There's never there's no consistency, and WWE has that issue too, but it's on display, and you're sort of advertising it in a show this big with this many matches that has the issue repeating itself over and over. So that to me took away from the match in a pretty dramatic way. But as for, overarching feelings about just the work, the setup, the title situation, I thought that Swerve and Christian worked really hard for what was very clearly a B-level title defense. This would, to me, have been a match that they would have main evented a special episode of Dynamite with, had they not had 9 pay-per-views on the slate this year. Like, this to me is one of those, like, maybe it's Fight for the Fallen or whatever, the beach show they do in the summer. Just one of the specials. Instead, it ends up being a semi-main event on one of your biggest shows of the year, and that's fine. But I don't think that there was anyone who had any genuine anyone who even talked themselves into the idea that Cage was going to win here. I mean, Swerve is a fresh champion. He's a hot character, hot babyface. The promotion is behind him. Cage is on the downturn. He just lost the TNT championship to Copeland, and he had been off TV for quite a while. So there was just no sense that they were going to do a title change here. And that's a lot more acceptable when it's on a Dynamite and you're just going to tune in to the last 30 minutes of a show and get a really good TV main event. But that wasn't the case here. I think that Swerve is, as Frank said, there is some undercutting of Swerve, whether intentionally or not, because so much focus is going into the Elite storyline and the Anarchy and the arena stuff. And also, I mean, we've harped on this a lot, but I really think it's AEW's central problem right now. The number of titles and the parity among them is hurting everyone, but no one as much as Swerve Strickland, who's trying to stand out above the pack. And here he is with the first major star that the company had in Jon Moxley, carrying the more prestigious, with longer lineage, IWGP World Championship. And AEW is talking about said title as though it is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to feel like Swerve is the focal point, centerpiece, babyface champion when there is another bigger established star carrying a more established championship that doesn't belong in your company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a big complaint, and there are myriad reasons why AEW needs to pull back on the titles, and that's one of them. I think there's a lot of different arguments that people have thrown out, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it feels like it's kind of falling on deaf ears. I'm not sure that Tony Khan cares to hear those arguments. I don't really know what the arguments are to have more titles, and I'm sure we're not done, to be honest with you. I was scrolling through Twitter, and the presser, Tony Khan, brought up wanting to have like a mixed or intergender division. And so those titles may be coming at some point too. So enjoy the few titles that we have in AEW while you can.
It's funny too, Greg, because I don't know, I don't remember exactly when this interview took place, but very early in AEW's existence, there was an interview done that Tony talked about sort of shortcomings of previously failed promotions and things that he didn't like in modern pro wrestling. And one of the things that he brought up was the overabundance of titles and how he was really excited to have a promotion where he could make the titles really mean something. Yeah. So it's not like he has always held the belief that more titles is better. Like something along the way informed that decision and opinion.
And if you think about this, guys, right, you could probably go back to the time period between 2019 and 2022, let's say, and name every champion, or at least 80% of it.
Yeah.
Once they started bringing in, the Continental Championship and now the International Championship, Trios Champions, and now the TBS Champion. You probably just lost track because it just didn't have the prestige. And I mean, we used to have conversations about, okay, this is going to be the world title match at Double or Nothing. They're building to this at All Out, and there was a conversation about that. Now I'm just like, I go month by month with this promotion. And I mean, they're falling into the trap that WWE fell into for years, where you're having to have these monthly title defenses, all right, that just don't mean a hell of a whole lot, to your point, and even to what I said earlier. Swerve versus Christian would be on like a Saturday night's main event back in the day, or a special episode of Dynamite, like you said, or whatever, But now, because they do these more frequent pay-per-views, which is not what they were doing before, now you're forced to come up with these challengers, And you've got a big show at Wembley, right? You want to save a more special challenger for that show, don't you? Well, you still got to do Forbidden Door next month, okay? And I'm sure there's going to be a themed episode of Dynamite coming up. Probably going to want to put a title match there too. So that's 3 more title defenses. Oh, and by the way, All Out is right after All In. So it's a lot. So.
Well, Tim's staying up late with us, 2:30 Eastern time, so I want to get his question on the screen. What did you guys think about the match order tonight on the show? You know what? I think the best thing that I could say about the match order is I didn't think about it during the show. So if I don't think about the match order, then it probably was a good match order. So that's one thing I don't really have any qualms about Frank? Anything that you would change in the match order just from being there live? I mean, because I know the match order has a lot more effect on the live crowd than it does people watching at home. So, is there anything you would have changed to? I mean, it seemed like the crowd was into it all night, so it's not like there were any lulls that you'd want to mask with a change to that match order.
I mean, so your last 3 matches were your triple main event. Okay, I got my issues with a triple main event, but it is what it is. I might have moved Copeland Malachi up a little bit and maybe move Orange and Trent to before Willow and Monet, something like that, just to have kind of a come down. I mean, not that any of these matches are come down matches. Every match on an AEW pay-per-view is big, so it's kind of a different conversation. But, you know, you've got a lot going on in Copeland versus Malachi with the steel cage and everything like that, so maybe move that up. I mean, you could pick one. You could move Orange and Trent down. You could move Moxley and Takeshita down. Serena Deeb and Tony, well, 2 women's matches back-to-back. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe move the trios match. You know what I mean? Just something like that. Something just to kind of, you know, have a little bit of a come down, and then, you know, you get the crowd re-energized for your 3 big matches. So that's probably about the only thing. The opening match was fine. I thought that they opened, you know, the show correctly with the international. I mean, you got that fresh crowd. Get Ospreay right out there. You know, I thought that was the right call. So, yeah, that'd be my only quibble. What about you guys? What do you think?
Brandon?
The only thing that I can really think of is getting Malachi and Copeland further away from Anarchy in the arena. If you're going to do multiple hardcore matches with blood and guts and all that stuff, keep them as far away from each other as you can, just so not to tire out a crowd. But really, like, the crowd didn't seem to mind, so I'm not going to, you know, make too big of a fuss over it.
You know what? They don't care. You know what this crowd is? This is the old NXT crowd. That's what this crowd is. They just, if you remember those pay-per-views, right? Those takeovers, they didn't care. I mean, you could put Bugs Bunny versus Elmer Fudd out there and they cheer it. I mean, it's just.
And they didn't do come down either. They just went. But it was also, there were also 5-match cards. So
yeah, right. But like I said, this group doesn't care. But I'm totally with you. That's the only match I'd move, and you can pick whatever match you want to put in that spot.
Well, I know we already talked about Anarchy in the arena, generally speaking, but there is a comment in our chat that I did want to get to relating to Anarchy in the arena. So let me get to that here, and we'll talk about this. This is from Anthony. He says, if you guys were in creative at AEW, how would you book the storyline with the Young Bucks, and how would you set them up finally being taken down and their power being taken away? You know, that I guess that would have to come from Tony Khan. I mean, he's the only one that could take their power away unless they put it up in a match. It's wrestling, so that can happen legally. I'm not sure if that's really a thing that you could do, but that's really the only thing in terms of how does this storyline end, which is kind of, I think, what Anthony's getting to. How do they get their comeuppance? You know, I don't think it comes till Kenny Omega comes back, because I think that's a pretty big part of the storyline, as we saw when he was attacked. So I think he's got to come back for that to happen. And look, Kenny's got EVP powers too. So maybe his EVP powers are stronger than the Young Bucks. I don't know. But I think it does raise an important point that, you know, how does this story end? The Young Bucks, are they going to, in storyline, give up their EVP powers? Like, I don't know. Brandon, do you have any ideas about how they can get out of this one?
I mean, I think eventually, if or until you move the Bucks back into a babyface role where they're doing kind of their old shtick, I think that you will probably have to find a way to strip them of their power so that there's a plausible reason for them not to run roughshod over the show. If we're going to stipulate to the idea that is eventually going to come down the pipeline and they're not just going to do this long term and then eventually turn babyface again, then I think that you want to you want to use the heel heat that they are able to generate as an opportunity to cement your number one babyface. And I do agree that Kenny Omega needs to be involved in the eventual comeuppance without question. He needs to be on the babyface side of this. But unless they really make Kazuchika Okada the face of the Elite, this isn't going to be like a big one-on-one blow-off where the Bucks, lose their powers or whatever. It's going to be a big multi-man match like we saw tonight, whether it's just a tag, whether it's Anarchy in the arena next year, or it's Blood and Guts this summer or later in the year, whatever. It's going to be something like that. And to me, you take the opportunity, if you have a heel faction or a group of heels who are dominating the promotion and are a burden to the fan base, then the best thing to do is have the biggest babyface in the company be the ones to shut them up. The John Cena. You want John Cena to be the guy who defeats all the ultimate bad guys. So to me, it's Will Ospreay. You have Ospreay do it. You put Ospreay on the side of Kenny Omega. You allow them to put differences aside temporarily for the good, for the betterment of AEW, and it's Ospreay who shuts up the Bucks.
All roads lead to Ospreay. Frank, what do you think?
I just want to check off a box. Are we concerned that Tony Khan might be Eric Bischoff Part 2?
I like to think that Tony has enough self-awareness to know that he is not the level of performer in front of the camera that Eric Bischoff was.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not too concerned. I think he's a tool in this storyline. Yeah. I see what you did there. Okay. It's 2:37 in the morning. Somebody's gonna clip that and it's gonna go all over social media. It's gonna reach Tony Khan and I'm gonna get an angry email. Look, that's not what I meant. It's not what I said. He is a tool to be used in this storyline to advance the Young Bucks as heel EVPs. Because if you're a heel in charge, you've got to have a babyface in charge that you are coming up against, and that babyface in charge is Tony Khan. So no. Short answer is no, Frank. I'm not concerned about that.
Because he said he wasn't gonna get involved on TV, and he did. So, like, when somebody crosses one barrier, I get concerned that they're going to cross another. And we're going to have.
And sometimes that can be addicting. Being in front of the camera and being a character can be addicting. We've seen that happen before.
That's my point. And is he going to say, "Oh, you know what? This is cooler than I thought"? What? Because listen, what did he grow up watching? He grew up watching ECW and he grew up watching WCW, and he was a teenager during the NWO years. So, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I would just, have it in the back of your mind. I think like you guys. I mean, I think that ultimately there's going to be a babyface faction or a group, not necessarily a faction, but a group of people that do take down the Young Bucks. And, it's a stipulation where, they have to not necessarily relinquish their EVP powers, but they'll have to answer to somebody. If they lose, then, you're still EVPs, but you answer to so-and-so, somebody to kind of keep them in line. I don't know that they'll drag this out till next year. I think Blood and Guts is probably your answer to that. I think they typically do that around the end of the summer, or at least towards the end of the summer,
July.
About July. Okay. So not too far away. And I don't see
no Omega.
What's that?
They'd have no Omega that's kind of why I was thinking they might drag it out further, because they won't have Omega back.
Sure. I mean, unless that's unless they get Ospreay involved in that, I don't know. We'll see. But that would be, that would be the way I would. That would be the way I would do it.
All right, gentlemen. I would call this a successful venture tonight. The maiden voyage, if you will, of Wrestling Night in America on the PWTorch YouTube page. We've got a couple plugs here. I put this up earlier while Brandon was talking, but I didn't give any context to it. I thought it was kind of self-explanatory. But usually at the end of the show, I ask for your plugs. I'm plugging Brandon for himself. Brandon does the written reports for pay-per-views at PWTorch.com for both WWE and AEW. And of course, he did it for Double or Nothing tonight. So make sure to check that out. Also, PWTorch.com/GoVIP. Subscribe. If you are not a subscriber, you can get tonight's VIP Roundtable podcast with Wade Keller, Todd Martin, and Rich Fan. Again, that's PWTorch.com/GoVIP. Tomorrow night, Wade Keller will be right back here on the PW Torch YouTube page for the Raw post show. So don't forget to check that out. You can email him your thoughts about Raw at wadekellerpodcast@gmail.com. All right, that's my last plug. Brandon, anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
Nope, I'm ready for bed. And I can't even go to bed. I still have to do analysis for
you
show.
Oh,
I'm not even done.
You are tougher than me. I'm crawling into bed right after this. Frank, anything you want to plug?
Yep, on the PW Torch VIP network, Pro Wrestling Then and Now. I just cut an episode reviewing Slamboree 1994. Been staying in the 1994 world of pro wrestling, so check that show out. But having a lot of fun. I did Spring Stampede a month before and WrestleMania 10 as well, so it's really been fun reviewing that year. You guys have both been on that show with me before, and your time is coming soon to get back. So we'll talk and we'll get together. And I'm going to try to get on one of these post shows. Wade reached out to me recently, and I couldn't do it. And but I want to get back in the fold on that. Kind of miss doing that. So
well, now you get to be on camera.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I like the face-to-face. I like it better. It's a real conversation, So
it's nice.
Listen, my cat made an appearance in the early going. You missed.
Oh man. Well, if I was home, Biscuit would have made an appearance because he jumps on the counter and then he tries to knock over the computer. So I have to.
That's exactly what she did.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate you guys having me. It was a lot of fun. Talking Double or Nothing with you guys. Really appreciate it.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. And don't forget to catch us each and every Sunday night, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on PW Torch YouTube page. You can find me on social media at Greg M. Parks. And because it's Wrestling Night in America and it's Sunday nights. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good one.